To talk about accelerating the path to regenerative medicine, Dr. David Pearce, President of Innovation and Research of Sanford Health, joins Moderator Dr. Peter Marks, Director of the Center for Biologics Evaluation at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration.
Hi, I'm Peter Marks, and I'm here with David Pearce, and we're going to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities for developing cellular therapy products. I think probably I'll pose the first question to David about, from your perspective, what do you see are the real challenges, the places of need for developing these therapies?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. So I'm David Pearce, the President for Research at Sanford Health, and it's certainly an interesting time with the terminology cellular therapies that's linked to regenerative medicine. So, as the overseer of research for a large health system, the challenge for us is that we have patients seeking these types of therapies all of the time. And obviously, as many of us know, there's many offerings that are defined as cellular therapies, and some may or may not actually be cellular therapies. But, most, if not any of them, are not approved. So as a health system, it's our responsibility to actually work through to legitimize these. And I say legitimize these in terms of the actual science and the application and the outcomes, as well as making sure we adhere to the ethos of first do no harm, because we still have a long way to go. I think during the course of this discussion, I can populate with some information that we believe we're moving in the right direction. But the first challenge really primarily is people want this, and people are seeking it, and unfortunately getting it without true validation.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting place that's exactly, we're really well aligned there. The whole regulatory framework here for cellular therapies was premised on this concept that certain things would be safe and their efficacy could be assumed. That's why, skin transplants don't need a biologic license when they're not manipulated. They're, particularly. And there are many products that don't need to come in for licensure under our regulatory framework, but ones where we don't know, where we can't predict their efficacy, or ones where there's significant manufacturing which could introduce safety concerns, that's where we have to get involved. And I think that's been a real challenge for us, because much as people want these therapies, the data supporting the use of many of them is very thin. And it's been a challenge because I think it's been a challenge, and I have a lot of empathy for those who are trying to develop them, because unlike pharmacologic therapies, where you have a big pharma house trying to develop these, which has the kind of funding behind it that can, many of the people trying to develop these therapies are individual practitioners or groups of practitioners where they don't have the resources. And so some of the issues can be challenging. And we've been trying to work on those regulatory issues to help provide pathways for people to collaborate and to be able to get the kind of information by any one of a number of means that will help us feel confidence that we have the effectiveness data that says that these therapies actually do what they say they'll do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So, we are in those trenches that sort of, I'm paraphrasing you there in terms of, how do we get there? Our patients want these cellular therapies. The first thing was really education, because there's a stigma of stem cells is always, surrounding, cellular therapies. And, in the Midwest where we're located, that really brought to light a few questions initially with respect to when we launched what we called our cellular therapies or regenerative medicine program. And that was an interesting discussion because, when it comes down to, in an oncology, we've been using bone marrow transplantation for many years. So once you get a comfort level, really, even with some of our physicians, that stem cells or a cellular product has been in use for many years. And then, of course, the next step was for us is to really evaluate the landscape. And I'm going to assume it's the same for many others. I mean, we can talk about cellular therapies in oncology with the sophistication of CAR T or in type 1 diabetes. But our patients have really been seeking, musculoskeletal or orthopedic treatments. Everybody wants, everybody's got those aches and pains, and it seems to me that we have billboards and newspaper ads, internet ads, constantly referring to these types of therapies that could, treat pain in the shoulder or pain in the back or osteoarthritis, which may be generating that pain. So we took a very measured approach to start with, which was just look at the landscape of what was out there. And, much like with bone marrow, we know what the cell lineage is there. A lot of people are offering these fat-derived products in terms of lipoaspirates or whatever. So we looked at the cellular lineage there, took a hard look at the science and really opted to pursue clinical trials in orthopedics initially, using what I would call stromal vascular fraction. And this is an interesting time because, I mean, Peter, I really empathize with you because the science just can't keep up with what's actually happening out here right now. Stromal vascular fraction, there's some adipose-derived stem cells in there. There's leukocytes, there's a few other things. Who knows what growth factors and other bits and bobs are in there. And that's really, where other people have been using that, and as you're aware, we've actually performed and completed clinical trials using this fraction now. First of all, just to get the efficacy, so safety, obviously, which I talked about first, do no harm, and of course it's safe ultimately because it's autologous. It's from the individual. You take it out here and basically filter, collect the cells and apply it to the joint. I think the next thing is obviously now we have preliminary efficacy in some of our studies, but not to the level in terms of multi-site clinical trials. And that's where I'm looking forward to with respect to how we advance that. But of course, the general public, first of all, is very impatient and they don't really understand what we need to do with respect to some of these things.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right, is that the general public, it's hard to understand. It seems, especially because it seems like they're my own cells, they can't harm you. Why not just do this? The issue is that, there are, if you do enough procedures with autologous cells, you occasionally will come into a contamination or other issue. And any harm, if there's zero efficacy, is a problem, right? So it would be really nice to be able to know that these programs are working, if nothing else, because financial toxicity of therapies that don't work are a problem for people. They're also a problem, even if these are were to be paid for by insurance, they would be a problem for the healthcare system. But right now, for many people who are paying out of pocket, it would be nice to know that they were actually getting the benefit that was more than just some placebo effect of knowing that they were trying something. So I think just to be commended about doing the studies and doing them carefully and correctly and under IND the way you're doing them, that's what needs to happen here. So it's a great example of what needs to happen, and going out and doing what needs to happen. Takes the courage to do, because the courage and fortitude to do, and you're to be commended for it, because so many just take the easy route of saying, oh, well, we can just inject this, and they're just doing it. And it's not leading to the kind of knowledge that we need to advance people's health and know that this actually really works, and to move from advancing. I suspect that if we really make progress here, we'll see, just like you talked about, it may turn out that if you find some stromal vascular fraction that actually works, the next thing will be to find, well, how do you tweak that? What element of that works? And unless you have the initial data to know that it actually works in the first place, it's going to be very hard to get there. I mean, one of the things that sometimes I think it's important for people to just understand is that, the difference, people say, well, what's the difference? It's a drug. The difference is most small molecule drugs have a couple of atoms that are hung together next to each other, low molecular, basically low molecular weight products and are not complex macromolecular assemblies like a protein. But wait a second, cells are super complex assemblies, and in some ways they're almost like autonomous beings. They can do things on their own, and so the complexity that we're working with here is so much greater. So in a way, it's kind of an interesting thing that unfortunately the entities that have to work with this are working with a substrate here, the cells, that are challenging to control. And so trying to do what you're doing, of trying to control as many variables as you can and then get an answer, is so important.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, interesting. I mean, I'm a cellular guy myself, and the biology is complex. The other thing, which has been the interesting challenge, is of course the operations of doing this in orthopedics. Taking a cell. Well, obviously, first of all, doing some imaging. So you need radiology to see where you want to deliver the cells based on the osteoarthritis or the injury, if it was a rotator cuff tear. And then, of course, you're going to be dealing with, your orthopedic or sports medicine physicians who are dealing with the actual patient with respect to the malady. And then, of course, getting that lipoaspiration as well, which is typically done by plastics or, the vascular guys. So we've worked to credential, our sports medicine guys, which brings the cost down considerably as well, but also so we can do more of a point of care. And I think that's where, Sanford Health has just really had that advantage, because, the physicians are employed by us and we can coordinate schedules. I don't know how those clinics down the road do it, because they probably don't have all of those subspecialties, which again is, validation of why we're taking that measured approach. We have the right people doing the right things. And you're absolutely right. When you inject something into somebody, we have to have that gram stain and make sure that, we're perfectly safe. And then the other fun part, Peter, to me has been is that as I've learned this in terms of, real world data, and we took a lead from you in one of your articles that you wrote here in terms of how do you really measure the impact with, some of these things. Orthopedics is, the physician generally just asks how the patient is doing, and imaging is really just not there to tell us too much about what might be actually happening with some of these therapies right now. So that's what we've designed with, this one trial that we have, as you're aware, where we're looking at osteoarthritis across several joints now, and really, asking that question in terms of the outcomes, whether it's just pain scores and mobilities. And I think that ultimately, the clinical outcomes, may be judged as not as hard a science as some of the molecular outcomes we're sometimes used to, but it's really the best way to move forward with this real world data approach. So I thank you for your efforts in that. And I thank you for always being available for these types of discussions.
Thank you. I think, we're very open here I think we've been open to trying to work with sponsors because we see that there's this potential need for individual investigators to collaborate together. Scott Gottlieb, when he was commissioner, and I put out a kind of this pathway, and then we actually articulated that in guidance too, of trying to have this collaborative development where individual practitioners could collaborate, manufacture a product at separate locations according to a similar protocol, put people into a common clinical trial protocol, get an answer, and then essentially get licensed for each of their institutions. I think we need to think creatively like this in this field of regenerative medicine, because it isn't the same as making a pill, and so we're not going to be able to export the pharmaceutical model the same way as has been done for small molecule drugs or even protein therapies.
Yeah, it's certainly, and as I think I mentioned before, with the science, the pace of the science right now, but also the pace of the consumer demand, and I think that's the bit where I really think with regenerative medicine in these clinics. I mean, I would love to see some politicians get behind this a little bit more in terms of, providing you some support in terms of regulations with respect to this. The opioid crisis, got a lot of political attention, and I think the application of some of these approaches by unlicensed and maybe unqualified individuals should garner some attention as well. And getting some more physicians behind us on this would be good too.
No, yeah, I totally agree. I think the other thing that we will continue to do is try to directly educate the consumer, because I think good consumer education will help direct people to people like yourself who are doing this correctly, and help avoid kind of stem cell tourism to potentially dangerous opportunities. So thank you so much for speaking today. We could have gone on for a lot longer, but I think we're out of time now. Thank you again.
Thank you, Peter. It's been a pleasure.